Welcome, writer and activist Charlotte Clymer. It's so wonderful to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. It's good to be here.
Of course. Well, we're here because you were at the historic signing of the Respect for Marriage Act at the White House the other day. And I just wanted to begin by asking you, what was the mood like on the ground there?
Joyous. I don't think I've ever been around that many queer folks in DC. DC has more LGBTQ people per capita than almost any other metropolitan area in the United States, and yet seeing thousands actually, thousands of queer people on the South Lawn it's the kind of thing that you never get to see, and to be in the presence of so many folks who have worked toward that historic day, it was a once in a lifetime event.
After 4 years of Donald Trump and some really hateful legislation, what was it like for you to witness our president and vice president? Nancy Pelosi was back there, our politicians back there supporting something that protects LGBTQ plus people and interracial couples?
It felt like one of those rare collective wins. You to see my president and my vice president, who have so strongly supported LGBTQ rights, stand up there and stand beside us so firmly and proudly, resolutely, especially with the mess that this entire year has been with the onslaught of anti-LGBTQ legislation and the anti-trans rhetoric, all this nonsense. I mean, gosh, the Club Q shooting, weeks ago. I mean, there's so much in the world that's awful right now. So for all of us to be there on the South Lawn at the White House and watch our leaders, reaffirm our importance and our dignity and our respect, and to see, I would say queer elders who have been working on this issue for decades, before I was born, to see them have that realization. I'm getting a little emotional just thinking about it. I mean, these folks have been paving the way for folks that they will never meet, not just here in the United States, but all around the world. We've had such a vibrant queer movement, and the leaders who have shown us the way and built that path for the rest of us, they deserve their recognition. I was really happy to see them get it that day.
Wonderful, wonderful. There was a really sweet moment, and I'm not sure if you noticed when it happened. President Biden took the signing pen and he handed it to Vice President Harris, who has been on the front lines of the fight for marriage equality for decades, and also is in an interracial marriage. And so that moment was really lovely and subtle. What did that mean to you to see that?
It was, it felt a little bit full circle. I mean, so in 2012, President Biden became the first national leader to come out in support of same-sex marriage. And when Prop 8 was struck down, the vice president at the time was the Attorney General California, and she immediately ordered. In fact, she went down to the local registrar in San Francisco and gave a respectful order to them to immediately issue marriage licenses. Yeah. I mean, she's been out front on this issue for so long, and so to see her get her due recognition for being proud to stand beside our community was long overdue. And both her and the first gentleman. I mean, they always show up to fight for us. And they always show up to fight for marginalized communities generally. So to see them get that recognition was very, very sweet.
Yeah, it was lovely. Well, I have to ask, how did you celebrate after?
How did I celebrate? Okay, well, I mean, goodness gracious. So first of all, to set the tone for you, it was very cold that day in DC. And, that we were warned ahead of time to put on layers, put on jacket, because it was going to be an outdoor ceremony. And we got there, and even though it was cold, I don't think anybody really felt cold. We were all huddled together, thousands of us just kind of packed in listening to this speech. And there was this warmth that, generated from the crowd. The White House was lit up in rainbow. The colonnade was lit up in rainbow colors. And there was just so much celebration afterward, photographs and, crying and, hugs galore. And then, a lot of us went to the after parties. I went to HRC, which, is, one of my home, where I worked for years. And when I worked at HRC during those years, we didn't have these big victories. Most of our time was spent just pushing back against the onslaught of hate. And so to see folks there, I would say, celebrating a rare win. This is the first legislative win for LGBTQ rights on the federal level since the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And so to see folks celebrating the fruits of their hard-earned, hard-fought labor over the past few decades was really great. And we danced and had drinks, and I mean it was a celebratory atmosphere that I've never seen before. And so it was especially meaningful for that reason.
That sounds incredible. Well, I'm glad that you got to experience it. This is a huge step forward. I don't want to be a bummer, but there are so many fights left ahead of us. There are more than 300 anti-LGBTQ plus bills circulating in states around the country. And the violence against LGBTQ plus people, especially trans people, has increased over the years. This year was particularly dangerous. And I wonder, would you talk about what is next? What are the next fights that you see as someone who's been in the fight for a while?
I'm so glad you brought that up, Tracy. When same-sex marriage was legalized by the Supreme Court, I think there was this fear among activists that a sense of complacency would settle in with the broader American public, because I think a lot of Americans saw marriage equality and thought, oh, the fight's over. We don't have to worry about LGBTQ rights anymore. And that kind of complacency has been really hard to overcome and educate people on the fights left ahead. So, what I've been telling folks, and I think what a lot of advocates and folks in the movement have been telling people is, celebrate this win. It's big. Millions of families will have protections that they otherwise would not have had. But last year was the deadliest year on record for trans people. At least 57 trans non-binary people were murdered in the United States, most of them Black women. There have been, as you said, hundreds of anti-LGBTQ pieces of legislation introduced across the country. The attacks against trans healthcare, especially for children, has been horrific. The Equality Act has been passed. So in most of the country, we still lack protections against housing, protections against discrimination in housing, credit, public accommodations, jury service. There are so many fights ahead, and we're going to get back to work. But there's nothing wrong with celebrating a huge win. And this was a huge win. If Obergefell is overturned in the next couple of years, these families who have protections now would not have had them without this bill being signed. And it's going to be the equivalent of armoring up families who otherwise, wouldn't have that kind of government backing with their families and the rights that they're entitled to, or they should be entitled to.
And I should also ask, there was a religious exemption written into this bill. And I wonder, would you talk a little bit about how you see that playing out in the larger picture?
I think it's largely redundant. A lot of the religious, quote unquote, religious freedom protections that were put in there. And it's not about religious freedom. It's about, this ridiculous sense that LGBTQ families somehow threaten religious people. I mean, I'm religious. I'm a Christian. I go to church here in DC. It's not an attack on religion. And I think those protections that were put in were mainly put in to mollify anti-LGBTQ conservatives who either push the lie that LGBTQ rights are a threat to quote unquote religious freedom, or that they actually believe that. So, yes, there are going to be complications that arise, and we're just going to keep fighting and pushing. Change doesn't come overnight. It's incremental. It is all too painfully slow. And I think, activists who are criticizing this bill have every right to criticize it. It's not perfect, and I think I said this when, the bill was clear that the bill was going to pass the Senate, but this bill does suck in many ways.
Yeah.
The thing is, though, we're a part of a movement that has achieved progress slowly, day by day, year by year, decade by decade. We're going to have fights ahead, and a lot of them will have to do with this bill, but we're just going to fight them and win. That's what we do. We win in the end. It just takes us a long time to get there.
Right. Well, you sound overall hopeful that we are on the right path, and that's wonderful.
Yeah. Yes, ma'am. I'm very hopeful. We wouldn't be here without decades of advocacy by LGBTQ folks, and then certainly not without the lawmakers who have fought for us, including our own Senator Tammy Baldwin,
Yes.
one of our queer women in Congress. Who
first lesbian in the Senate.
That's right. First lesbian in the Senate.
Yeah.
Yeah, first lesbian in the Senate and one of two queer women overall.
Yeah.
And she did a remarkable piece of legislative brilliance in bringing this together. This was not inevitable, by the way, and I want to be clear to folks about that.
Yeah.
Senator Baldwin made this happen. She brought the people together to the table. She brought Republicans to the table, made this happen so that families would have these protections, and she deserves enormous credit for getting it across the finish line.
Wonderful. Well, Charlotte Clymer, I want to thank you for your time. It's been a pleasure, and thank you for your advocacy and all of your work.
And Tracy, thank you for your journalism. Where would we be without queer media, right?
I mean, we're doing it.
You're amazing, and I'm just so thankful for you.
Yes, likewise. Thanks, Charlotte.